Yeah, we got a few people.
Alright, hey guys, Steve with Prima Coffee here. Today we just want to take a little time to talk about like cold coffee, including iced coffee, cold brew. Take a look at some of the techniques that you can use to make cold coffee. Obviously, we're in like the beginning of August here. For most of us, that means it's muggy and hot, and I don't know. We're getting pretty used to 90-degree days here in Louisville. So it's like the best time of year to be brewing some cold coffee. But there are a ton of different approaches. A lot of them have very different results. So we wanted to take a look at some of those and answer any questions that you have to help you get the best out of your cold coffee while it's in season. So we do have a couple of different brewing devices that we're working with here. Right back here we have the Yama cold brew tower. This is the Kyoto style dripper. We've had this going for about 2 hours now. I think it's going to take probably another hour to finish up. But this is similar to your toddy style cold brew, sort of, in that it's a longer process. It uses cold water, but instead of being an immersion method, it's a percolation method. So you have this slowly dripping cold water going through a bed of grounds. And again, it takes like 3 or 4 hours depending on your batch size. And the flavor is going to be a little bit different than a standard immersion cold brew, which actually I also have in my French press. And this has been completed. It's actually already been filtered and decanted. It's really, really simple. You know, if you have a French press, or even if you just have like a mason jar, cold brew is supremely easy to make in that. All you have to do is throw your grounds and your water in there. You leave it to steep. This was a 14-hour steep. You'll see recipes vary pretty much anywhere from like 8 to 24 hours, depending on what the result is going to be. I used a 1-to-10 ratio, so that was like about 40 grams to 400 milliliters of water. And I also did a hot bloom, which means that I started out using about 75 grams of hot water from a kettle. I let the coffee bloom, I stirred it up a little bit, let it degas, and we find that gets a little bit more acidity in the brew, which some people really want to avoid. Generally I think cold brew is known for being very smooth, very chocolatey or caramelly, a little sweet, not super acidic, and often not very bitter at all. But when I drink cold brew, or when I just drink iced coffee in general, I kind of have this perspective where I want it to have more acidity, like lemonade. It's really refreshing to have that acidity, especially with something cold. And again, that's my opinion. So we do a hot bloom to bring out a little bit more acidity, and with this particular ratio, a 1-to-10, once it's been decanted and filtered and everything, I don't find that it needs any dilution at all. It's not super high strength, especially if you pour it over ice. It really doesn't seem to need any extra water. So there are some recipes out there that would say, when you serve, you should dilute it with water, like 1-to-1 or something like that. But I think this one can be enjoyed straight, pretty much. But anyway, so the Kyoto, it's actually it's the same ratio. I did a 1-to-10, and we could probably taste it and see and just sort of compare. I have a feeling that this is going to be a little bit higher strength, mainly because of the percolation, but I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, just to start off, does anybody have any questions, any problems troubleshooting your brews, or sort of curiosities about different methods, anything at all? Feel free to shoot them at us. Even if I'm talking about something else, give us or type out your question, and Ryan will let me know. Anything so far? No? All right, cool. Then the first thing that I want to talk about is a method that we posted recently in our updated iced coffee and cold brew guide, which is up on our blog. That has consistently been one of our most popular blog articles. I think a lot of people are really curious about the different iced coffee methods. That's where we posted our sort of AeroPress drip tower mod thing that we did, but we also updated it like 2 months ago, I guess, with some more recipes, including this thing, which is this is a whipped cream siphon. Generally, you'll see this being used for like whipped cream at cafe. Actually, I don't have a tip on it right now because I'm not going to be using a dispensing tip. But you know, if you go to a cafe or whatever, and you know you see them using one of these, basically all it is a big aluminum container that has a dispensing nozzle and a charging nozzle, and you use these nitrous oxide chargers. Now, the culinary world has been fond of these for the past couple of years because it allows you to do some interesting pressurized extractions. You can do cocktails in these, you can do like weird foams and you know all kinds of crazy stuff. But for coffee, what's really interesting is that you can get a very, very rapid extraction, even if it's cold. So you can do like a 1 to 2 hour cold brew. Basically, the benefit here is that when you have coffee and water in here, and you charge it up with the nitrous oxide is inert. It does not dissolve easily into water. It dissolves a little bit more easily into fat, which is why it works for whipped cream pretty well. But basically, all that does is pressurize this chamber. And since water is non-compressible, that doesn't actually have a direct effect on the coffee while it's steeping. But when you release the pressure, all of a sudden you're going to have what's called cavitation happening, where all these gases suddenly come out of solution. The water can rapidly extract what's in the coffee, and basically that speeds up the finishing process of your brew. So it's kind of like the most appropriate analogy would be like hitting the nitrous in like a race car or whatever, where all of a sudden you have this speed boost, and it lasts like a very short burst, but it just gives you a nice jump in extraction with your coffee. So, you know, for cold brew, that's great because that means that you can do a 1 to 2 hour steep and then decompress it and decant it, and all of a sudden you have this basically like full strength cold brew. But what I really like about it is that it allows me to do a crash cooled brew that sort of strikes a balance between like the Japanese iced coffee method, where you're brewing a full like a full drip coffee directly over ice, but you have to brew at higher strength to account for the dilution of the ice. So it's kind of this balancing act between getting a really good flavor and a good extraction, but also having to account for the dilution that happens when you add ice to it and allow the ice to melt and cool your coffee. So this allows me to get a sort of cold brew. I wouldn't call it a cold brew because I start with a hot bloom, I add a little bit of cool water to it, and then I crash cool it in an ice bath and charge it up. And 45 minutes later, I decompress it and decant it through a filter. So it's kind of this weird blending of processes that doesn't really have its own unique place. It just sort of kind of a lot of different things at once, but it results in a really, really good iced coffee, and that's what I love about it.
With texture too.
With texture too, yeah. Well, that you can get even more texture if you were to dispense it through a nozzle, where as you discharge the nitrous oxide through a liquid, obviously it's a gas, it's going to come out in bubbles, and the coffee has enough protein and carbohydrates to it as well. I mean, a drip coffee has lipids to it, but it's also very dilute. But it would give you this sort of interesting foam action. I'm actually not going to use that nozzle again. I don't have a dispensing nozzle on this right now. So really all I would do at the end is just depress this and let all the gas out. One question.
Is that a pretty standard process for shops using cold brew is the question?
No, not at all. This is totally out of left field, something crazy I came up with on my own. This is based on, so Chef Steps is an online sort of cooking site that likes to play with all kinds of modernist, actually like the guys behind Chef Steps are the guys behind Modernist Cuisine, which is a whole couple sets of big tomes on modern crazy cooking techniques. They also now have a site called Chef Steps, which is sort of along the same line, but they publish a lot of like videos and classes and that sort of thing. So like more digestible pieces than a big, $500 set of books. So they created the cold brew method that we posted on our blog, which is that 2-hour cold brew using the same sort of principle, but I kind of came in and tweaked it to my preference. I'm not such a huge fan of cold brew personally. I look for more acidity in my ice drinks, so I was trying to tweak it so I could get more acidity out, and that resulted in me coming up with this whole hot brew or hot bloom with cold water, then crash cooling it in an ice bath, and then pressurizing it and steeping it for 45 minutes.
A standard process in a commercial environment to achieve this kind of texture in coffee would more likely be a kegerator, something that's intended for beer. Can hold a lot more volume.
So I'm just going to do, let me just do 20 grams. I'll do a smaller brew here.
But this method is really unique because it's not only offering texture to the coffee, but it's also a medium to brew as well and to extract at the same time.
So for my grind, I'm going for about a little coarse on the side of medium. We have our Kenya here, so this is a 15 on the Kenya. I just have 20 grams of coffee. I'm doing a relatively small brew. This container can only hold a half-liter maximum in order to safely pressurize. If you don't have enough airspace in this container, when you pressurize it with a cartridge like this, it can cause a seal failure and kind of explode. So that can be dangerous. So you really need to make sure that you're working within the maximum capacity. So this is a 1 pint whipping siphon. So really, I'm going to do 20 grams to 300, so that's a 1 to 15 ratio, and then I'm going to charge it up. So again, I'm going to start with a hot bloom. So I have 20 grams in here. I'm going to use 45 grams of water, of hot water. This is, I went over a little bit, but whatever, that's 2 grams, doesn't make a big difference. This is at 205. I'm just going to give this a little swirl. I can see that it's nice and foamy in there. You probably wouldn't be able to see it with the camera. So I'm going to let that sit for a minute while I prepare my ice bath. So I just have this 1/6 size container. You can really use anything you want. What I'm going to do is once I add my cool water to this in about another 30 seconds or so, I'm going to immediately dunk it into the ice bath and start stirring it. And that's so I can get the temperature down to like 40 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit as quickly as possible. Obviously, I don't have direct contact with the ice here, so it's not going to dilute anything. But that also means that it's going to take a little while, to cool down. Still, this sort of like crash cooling method is one of my personal favorite methods of preparing iced coffee. I like to brew full strength, drip style, and then crash cool it however I can. A lot of times I'll use a container just like this, and something like a steaming pitcher or a Boston shake or anything with like a thin steel wall. I'll put my coffee in there, I'll stir it a lot, and cool it down as quickly as I can. Now we have something fancy like the Coil, where it's a purpose-built device. It allows you to quickly cool your coffee down, again without dilution, using the same principle, but it's not quite as hodgepodge as the methods that I use at home are. So now I'm going to add the rest of my water, again just up to 300. And I'm just going to dunk it in. I'm going to stir it up. Now this does add agitation to the brew. That means that I'm adding energy to the extraction, so that means that I'm technically extracting it a little bit faster. So that is a consideration. I kind of go a little bit coarser with that in mind with my grind. So basically that's kind of it's tempering the effect of the amount of agitation that I add to it by stirring it to cool it. And really that's just, I don't know, it's something that you sort of have to dial in when you try this method. And really, we don't expect everybody to go out and try this. A lot of people don't have these whipping siphons. They are a little bit expensive. Mine was like $100. I use it for a lot more than coffee, so it's worthwhile to me. But you know, for those of you at home who are just sort of curious, you know, I wouldn't encourage you to run out and buy one of these just to try this coffee unless you really want to have a whipping siphon. But it is a novel technique, and you know, there's some potential there if we can find somebody who can, you know, make this more, maybe make a device that's a little bit more applicable to coffee directly. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to sort of skip the 1 minute in the process where I continue stirring it, just to show you how the rest of this works. So I'm going to screw the lid on my siphon here, make sure it's nice and tight. Now I have a lot of airspace in here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 chargers. You just screw that on, it breaks the seal, puts the gas into the container, and then I'm going to just release a bunch of that pressure, because what I have in there is a lot of air, and air contains, you know, 20-ish% oxygen. I don't want that oxygen in there. I'd rather have the inert nitrous oxide in there, because even over the course of 45 minutes, I really don't want to mess with oxidation. So by kind of depressurizing it after that first cartridge, you get out a lot of the air, not all of it, but a lot of the air. Oops, actually I shouldn't just leave that screwed on. You get out a lot of the air, and then you repressurize it again with that second nitrous cartridge, and now it's mostly nitrous oxide taking up the airspace in there. Which is good, because that means we're just limiting the amount of oxidation that can take place. Now, I'll throw this in the fridge for about 45 minutes, which unfortunately is going to go past the end of our stream here. But when I'm finished with this, basically I just depressurize it again. Always depressurize before you open it up. Depressurize, take the lid off, and then I'll pour it through like a V60 filter to strain everything out. And then you have a really great flavorful, vibrant iced coffee. It's really not anywhere near the same as it's not even the same as a Coil brew, honestly, because you get this like sort of vibrance to it that you don't see. I think it's because of the nitrous oxide. It might actually just be because of the depressurization. It might increase acidity. I'm really not sure how to describe the flavor versus a Coil brew. It's very unique. But it's really exciting. It's, you know, I guess if you wanted to, you could, once it's done brewing, you could depressurize it and then repressurize again with a CO2 cartridge, and you can make like a coffee soda. Could be interesting. I've tried that with just regular brewed coffee, and it turned out horrible, but I mean, who knows? There might be ways to make it taste better. So again, I'm just going to throw this in the fridge. 45 minutes, and that's all set. And that recipe is on our blog. We can tweet a link after this, but it's our what everyone should know about iced coffee and cold brew. Anyway, I also want to cover doing a Coil brew as well. So the Coil is a brand new product. We just added it to our site on Friday, or I'm sorry, a week ago, so last Friday. Just launched. This is a product that's designed right here in Louisville, Kentucky. It is a dedicated coffee chiller. It's not really a brewing device. You have to brew your coffee separately. But basically how it works is you have this upper funnel lid, you have a stainless steel coil, and this whole big chamber here which you fill up with ice and water. And the coffee runs down through the coil. It cools as it comes into contact with the ice water, but again, it's not in direct contact, so it's not being diluted. You have a little bit of a flow restrictor valve here on the bottom, so the coffee takes its time flowing through the coil, which is good. It means it cools down more efficiently. And then you have a lower carafe that catches it all afterwards. So what I'm going to do is kind of get the setup to brew. And I might actually just, since it's faster, I might just make like an americano or something. I'll throw a little coffee in the espresso machine, and we'll cool it down really quickly here. So all I need to do to get this set up is put a whole bunch of ice and water in here. Kind of, there's no fill line in particular, but you know, about maybe a ½ inch below the spout, so there's enough room to set the funnel in. And then afterward, you know, it's basically ready to go to actually start cooling coffee. So, Coil is now ready to go. I just have it filled up with this pearl ice, a bit of water. I'm also going to, just because it has this rubber grommet, I'm just going to pre-wet the funnel so it's a little easier to slip onto the tube here. And then, there we go. We're ready. So this is all made of ceramic. The coil itself is stainless steel. It's a really, really beautiful product. But because of the ceramic and the water and the ice and everything, it's too heavy. Actually, I could show you here. It's too heavy for most scales. It already weighs more than 2 kilograms without anything else in it. So if you want to try brewing directly onto it, you need to have a kind of a more robust scale. I know a lot of brewing scales are right in that 2 to 3 kilogram range. The Jennings scales, the CJ4000s, those are actually 4 kilogram scale. Here we go, we have one. So, you know, if I turn that on, you can see it's about 3 kilograms when it's full, just shy of 3. Now, if I were to put an extra brewing device on there and, you know, the coffee and the water that get involved, I might even exceed the capacity of this Jennings. So really, you know, ideally you're brewing something on its own and then pouring it through the coil to cool it. It has a maximum capacity. I think the lower carafe holds about 600 milliliters total. I think, you know, when you're talking about the maximum capacity of the ice, the thermal capacity for it to cool, the amount of ice that you can fit in there, it's probably more in the 400 range. The top part, and I always forget this, I think it holds maybe 150 to 200 milliliters, and the coil itself holds like 150, I think. So with larger batches, you're going to pour a couple times. Not such a big deal, you know, just kind of let it sit and do its thing. It takes maybe 3 minutes to brew that or to cool down that largest batch. So not an extraordinary amount of time added to your brew, but you know, you do have to keep that in mind, especially if you're in a cafe. If you're using this for service, it's going to take a little extra time to finish up. But anyway, yeah, let me do an espresso. I'll pull a couple shots here, and we'll just...
You're going to slay a couple shots.
We're going to slay a couple shots, yeah. And then we'll sort of cool that down and make like a nice americano. Just use this. Two there. So the coil is really unique. A lot of people, as I mentioned before, you know, a lot of people are used to that Japanese style ice method, where, again, you kind of have to play with it a little bit, figure out, you know, what ratios you want. Don't want to talk too much while I'm grinding. Perfect. So the coil really kind of sets itself apart in that you don't have to worry about ratios anymore. You just brew coffee. Like if you've already got a coffee that tastes good and you have a ratio that works for you, you don't have to say, well, you know, is it going to taste good when I grind finer and I use 500 grams of water instead of 1,000 and I pour that over 500 grams of ice. You know, you don't have to worry about that. And you don't have to tweak your recipe at all. I mean, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't say that. You might have to tweak your recipe for flavor. We found that, you know, maybe like 1 or 2 brews, the drip coffees that we prepared, They didn't quite have the right flavor balance that we were looking for when they were iced. So, you know, coffees will generally taste better, or not better, they'll taste different freshly brewed hot than they will as they cool. So sometimes that means that you need to tweak your recipe a little bit, like maybe you want to get a little bit more sweetness out of it, so it tastes a little bit sweeter when it's cooled down, or even you want to back off because it doesn't really have the acidity that you want once it's crash chilled like that. So anyway, just going to pull a couple shots. There we go. Oops. I'm in the wrong mode here. Any more questions pulling in?
Not yet.
So let me ask you guys, what are your favorite cold coffee brewing methods? Are you guys cold brew people? Or are you more like Japanese method people? Do you just stick a pot of coffee in the fridge? What kind of stuff are you doing? Nobody? No takers?
Somebody says crash cooled for life.
Crash cooled for life, all right. I'd say that was Matt Gallion for sure, but he's standing in the room with me.
Ross Parmley says Japanese method.
All right. Yeah, honestly, like I was very much the like Japanese method for a very long time, until like, you know, I really found that if I would brew a cup of coffee in the morning and, you know, make it hot, because that's just what I sort of expect out of my first cup of coffee. And then later in the day, I'd do the same thing, but I'd make a you know, the Japanese style. I'd find that I could never really get the flavor where I wanted it. I was finding that it was always tasting better when it was hot than when I was like diluting it and cooling it. So that kind of led me to playing around with this whole like crash chill thing, where like I'd throw it into an ice bath and stir it up. I'd just use a steaming pitcher. I'd stir it up, and, you know, over the course of 2 minutes, get it down to like 40 degrees. And I found that got a lot closer to the hot flavor, which is kind of what I was looking for. So I kind of became this like crash cooling convert, but then I found that I wasn't drinking as much iced coffee because it was a hassle to get everything set up all the time. So I don't know, like I like the idea of the coil because it's a lot easier to use than the methods that I've used at home previously. And it's been a real pleasure to use. I don't know why our Akai is beeping at us right now. It's hungry. Feed me espresso. So I mean, it's just really fantastic. You know, I don't have to worry about breaking out this whole ice bath thing and stirring it constantly. I can just sort of pour it through the coil, and it cools down to exactly where I want it. In honestly less time and less effort than I'm used to. So I wasn't really thinking here because I had my big pitcher. It was all taken up. I guess I'll just pour the espresso through. Oh, will you give me that decanter real quick?
Sure.
There we go. There we go. Now I can add a little water. So I have about 85 grams of espresso, and I'm going to add 100 grams of water. Oops, there. That's close enough. And I don't have a thermometer handy, but, well, she's warm. So I'm just going to pour this through the coil. Really, really easy to do. I can fit this whole batch in. Again, if you're doing larger batches of coffee, you know, you may not be able to fit it in the coil and the funnel up top. But this, you know, like probably under 200 mils volume, totally fits just fine. So this is good for, like, you know, one person's iced beverage. But if you do want to do a batch, you just have to pour it in a couple do a couple pours, and you know, that's not really such a big hassle. Really easy to use. I've gotten a lot of questions, or I've seen a lot of questions about how to clean this. Honestly, it's the easiest thing in the world. After your coffee's done flowing through, just follow it up with some hot water. You know, we've got our kettle here. You can just use, you know, whatever, you know, throw a kettle on the stove, heat up some water, pour it through. Obviously, after your coffee has been poured out of the bottom carafe. So just hot water is good enough to start with. If you feel like you need to do a cleaning, like you've done 10 brews and you're like, no, maybe it's getting a little grody in there, just a little kafiza. That's all you need. Sprinkle some kafiza up top, or the, you know, the full circle equivalent. Sprinkle it up top. Pour some hot water in, and the flow restrictor, because it has this flow restrictor on the bottom, which you can see, it's kind of slowly flowing through. But that means that if you pour a bunch of kafiza solution through the top, it will slowly make its way through the coil. So it'll get a lot of contact time, which means that it's going to do a good job of clearing out all the oils and all the excess residue. And you know, you don't have to worry about trying to like run a pipe cleaner through here or something. Just kafiza is pretty much all you need. So flush it with some hot water. Occasionally flush it with some kafiza. If you do what we've done, and you know, from time to time you do like a latte through here, and you want to make sure that there's like no milk residue, just do milk wash. Same thing. Just pour a little bit of milk wash in there, follow it up with some hot water. It'll kind of sit in the coil as it flows through it, and it'll get rid of pretty much any residue you have. But yeah, I mean, that's really it. It's so easy to use. It takes just a minute here. It just stops, so I think, you know, we're probably done. The only thing, there's a little bit of excess up here on the top. I guess that they've kind of thought about working on that design. It's really not such a big deal. That's like 2 milliliters. You know, it may look like more than it is, but now, I mean, as you can see, I got a whole bunch of ice left here. If I were doing a larger batch, it would be mostly water. You can actually feel it start to heat up, but it really does. It does a great job of cooling it down. And I wish I had a thermometer handy to kind of show you, but if I take a cup, yeah, I mean, it's about as cold as you'd want an ice beverage to be. Like, you don't even need ice. I'd say this is probably like 40, 45 degrees right now. Larger batches might end up being like 50, maybe a little bit higher if you're totally maxing it out. Oh, here we go. We got a thermometer. Is this the broken one? No, it's not. Okay. So let me try and get a more accurate read here. Oh, this says it's like 53. Okay. Don't trust my taste buds to tell you temperature. But even that, I mean, it feels like a good temperature, just for drinking straight without ice. But you could throw ice in there; it wouldn't dilute much more. You know, that's pretty much all you would really expect out of a cold beverage. It's just the right temperature. And again, you know, you crash cooled it so quickly that, you know, you don't have to worry about some of the off tastes that you get with like a cold brew. Like, you know, sometimes you get a little oxidation flavor, like it tastes a little metallic or even a little skunky after, you know, a day sitting in the fridge. You know, some people don't mind that. Some people can't even taste if it's there. You know, don't let me tell you what to drink. But I mean, that's what, just again, like what I really like about this is you're able to cool it down so quickly that you don't have to worry about any of that. You just, you know, you brew your coffee full strength, you cool it down to a really good drinking temperature, and you're pretty much just ready to go. It's great. It's so easy. So I'm just going to set that back up there. Let's do a little taste test and just kind of compare the different methods here. All of these have used the same coffee. It's all this. It's a local Columbia roasted by Quills. So let's do. Here, this is the 14-hour cold brew. And grab the. I don't have any more glass. This is the, some people call it Kyoto style, some people call it just cold drip. And then the espresso. I won't be able to compare the sort of crash chill pressure brew just yet, but we'll get to that. So cold brew. It's got a little bit of acidity to it. It's I don't know. It's got kind of a little bit of like a cherry sweetness, but again, it's so very like chocolate and caramel forward. You know, it's a lot of sweetness. It's a lot of those like middle sort of notes with not a lot of like brightness or acidity. But again, not very much bitterness either. Honestly, I just think that this is it's a little boring to my palate. I like something a little bit more vibrant than this, but it's totally easy to see why people love it. It's so easy to make, and it's just super sweet on its own. It doesn't taste like, you know, if you leave a carafe from your Mr. Coffee out overnight and it's cold. Like, it doesn't taste like that. It tastes fresher. It tastes, it's a little bit more refreshing. Like this is a good cold brew. I'm just not such a huge fan of cold brew myself. So the Kyoto. Oh wow, it's very like it's like liquor-y in comparison. It's a higher strength for sure. It has this sort of like bourbon-y characteristic. It's kind of weird. It's almost like it's a coffee liqueur. I wasn't expecting that. Not out of the same coffee, but again, like that cherry is really popping out. It's like a black cherry sort of characteristic. It's a little woody, but it has a bunch more acidity in comparison. So, you know, even between these two, these are both cold brew methods. The fact that you're having this percolation happen definitely changes the characteristics of the brew. It's really interesting. I wasn't expecting that. And obviously the iced americanos, you know, it's espresso. It's not going to taste anywhere near the same.
It's going to be my fave.
Well, you may not agree. I don't know that extraction is very good.
Whose fault is that, Steve?
It's my fault. I didn't actually dial this espresso in. This is kind of metallic.
It is.
Yeah, I would say it's not a super great extraction. Yeah, no.
It's also maybe a little strong. You could maybe open up with a little more water.
Yeah, a little more. Still not super good, but it has more of like a malic acidity to it. It's kind of pear-like.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Anyway, so that's one coffee 3 ways. All delicious iced coffee beverages. Well, okay, maybe not delicious in this case, but those are actually pretty good. Any questions? Have any questions been coming in?
Not quite yet. What do you guys have to say?
Yeah, we can give you like 10 minutes for questions here. Really anything you want to ask. You know, we've had our mindset on cold brew and everything, but if you've got other questions too, we're happy to answer them. But I should say as well, this video is going to be posted to YouTube probably sometime next week on our channel. So if you want to come back and reference anything that we've said, it's going to be up on YouTube for you to look at. Or wherever. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention actually about the dripper, the tower. So if any of you are unfamiliar with this, As I mentioned, it's a percolation method. How this works is you fill the upper portion with ice and water, so you get like an icy slurry solution. You have this little dripping mechanism. It's just a ball valve, and you want to turn it so you hit about 1 drop a second. So actually, I'll just tweak this a little bit. I think we're kind of low on water here. The nature of this brewing method means that you have to kind of come back every couple hours or so and make sure that the drip rate is maintaining, because as you lose water volume, your drip rate will slow because there's technically not as much water pressure, because there's less mass of water above it. So you will need to tweak the valve as it brews. We have our coffee down here. This is sort of a medium grind. I think I ground it on a 15 or 16 on the Kenya. Now there's a little ceramic disc. It's like a permeable ceramic. It's hard to see right now because there's some grounds on the outside, but basically it is a filter. It makes a good enough seal that only the finest particles of coffee are actually going to make it all the way down and through. We have this filter. It's kind of like a French press filter. It's a metal mesh with a spring. You just set this in here and you can use that instead. I didn't use it because I just wanted to try the ceramic filter this time. There's also a paper filter up top here, and that's just to help sort of spread the water. You can see that there's this indentation that's happened over time. Honestly, I don't know if it's recommendable to like pack your grinds, like tamp them down somehow. That might help with that sort of divot that you're getting. But the paper is there to just sort of try and spread out the water so you get a more even extraction all around the outside. Once it passes through here, it just goes through this coil. This is purely ornamental. It doesn't really serve any purpose other than to catch the coffee and sort of spiral it down to drip into the reservoir below.
In style. In
style, of course. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, it's a fancy setup. This is basically the same thing as the brewer, the BRUER cold brewer that we have. That's a little bit more, this one's like $250, that one's like $80. It's a big price difference, but it's functionally pretty much the same thing. The brewer just uses glass and silicone instead of glass, silicone, brass, wood, all that stuff. So it's a simpler device, but the results are pretty much the same. So, I mean, this is a really unique sort of approach to cold brew, except that, if you say that there are two basic styles of brewing, one's immersion, one's percolation, then your standard French press cold brew or toddy cold brew, that's your immersion, here's your percolation. So I was honestly, again, I'm surprised that the flavor is that different, but it's really, it's kind of a unique way of cold brewing. Anyway, so any more questions? Anything at all?
Not yet.
All right. Well, I think we're going to close it up, guys. As always, we're here for you on Twitter at Prima Coffee. We've also got our website and our blog with tons of great learning resources there. Any way you want to reach out to us, we're always happy to answer questions, whether it's about specific brewing methods or devices or just helping to troubleshoot your coffee. We're here to help. So we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for watching today.